how could this happen? Now, you understand, there weren't any ministers on our basketball team. We were all students, or I was a college coach, but these guys were majoring in English or chemistry or history or something else. So how do you know that what you're saying is true? Well, the scriptures drove me to one thing, and that was Jesus is on the cross. And here's this thief. And Jesus was hanging up there, and that thief turned to him that day and said, "Truly, thou must be the Son of God." And then Jesus said, "This day thou shalt be with me in paradise." Now, had he been baptized? Had he had a theological background? But you see, the scriptures talked about Christ coming along to these people. This drove us to the Bible. And all the guys that went on VV started trying to understand. We didn't understand this dramatic conversion, although I had experienced it. You know, I didn't know how this was going to work in other people's lives like that, but it did. And to me, that is the story of VV, how God works in those situations.
They witnessed to a people that hungered for more in a land 10,000 miles from Taylor University. They witnessed through the word and talent because they were asked not only by a select group from Formosa, but asked some 2,000 years ago by Jesus Christ. This is the story of a team's witness that won souls for Christ.
1 Corinthians 9:22, Paul said, "I've become all things to all men, that by all means, save some." And one of the players on the team at that time said, who was interested in going with us, he paraphrased that a little bit. He said, if digging ditches will win men to the Lord, maybe we ought to dig ditches. Or if washing dishes win people to the Lord, maybe we should wash dishes. But we who are basketball players, we become basketball players to those who are athletic-minded, that we might win them to Christ. And that was kind of the basis that we talked about, the basic philosophy and the scriptures to what we're trying to do.
They were a hard-working family, a good family, but during the years of Don's junior high and high school, for some reason they didn't attend church. They had in earlier years, but not in those years that were very vital, I think, in his life. And he was kind of a rough character, I would say. I meet people here, in fact, next door is a lady that knew him from Selma when he was a student, and they all respected him and admired him for his basketball ability and his outgoing personality, but they all said he was somewhat of a character and had some rough elements in his background. And when he came to Taylor, he almost didn't stay because he was such a misfit. He came there not knowing anybody, and nobody knew him, and he said they probably wished he hadn't come when they got to know him. He had a foul mouth, he had bad language, and he had a lot of detrimental features, and in spite of the fact that he was kind of a winning personality on top of these other attributes.
I saw Don Odle play basketball when I was a 7th grader. That's what the huge impact he had on me, just from watching him play basketball. He was exciting. He was different, and I thought I'd like to be that way. And I never could be that way, but I sure wanted to be, because he was such a dynamic athlete.
When he came to Taylor, there were people praying for him, recognizing the fact that he needed the Lord. He was a misfit. He didn't belong in that environment. And he would have gone home had he not come to a place of salvation where the Lord reached out to him and really changed his life completely. That night that he knelt at an altar there at the university, He came back from the dorm. He was a changed person.
And I guess we have to start back with the early years of our married life, when my wife and I committed ourselves to some type of missionary work. We just felt that there was the Holy Spirit was speaking to us, that sometime in our life there would be some missionary opportunities. We ought to fulfill that. We had no idea when it would be, really didn't know whether it would ever happen, but we felt that commitment.
In 1951, a small international fellowship of Christians met and prayed, "Lord, how can we share the gospel in our land?" At the same time, Madam Chiang Kai-shek and her women's prayer group prayed for wisdom to reach the demoralized nationalist Chinese military. Dick Hillis, Overseas Crusades missionary, prayed for an open door into Taiwan's cities and schools. Colonel Paul Mao prayed that the Lord would multiply this Christian witness among Army, Navy, and government leaders. The result was a 10,000-mile telephone call to Coach Don Odle at Taylor University. Coach Odle was asked to consider the idea of bringing a basketball team to Taiwan for the express purpose of spreading the good word through basketball. It didn't take long for Coach Odle and his wife Bonnie to agree.
To the members of the Youth for Christ basketball team, I take great pleasure in extending to you a cordial welcome to the anti-communist bastion of the Republic of China. May I wish you success in the novel idea of combining sportsmanship and Christian evangelism. I want to express to you my warm appreciation of your efforts in winning more hearts for the kingdom of heaven. Madam Chiang Kai-shek.
Dick Hillis called Don Odle and asked if he could take a team out there. And Madam Chiang Kai-shek, the president's wife, had a prayer group there, and they were the ones that gave an official invitation for our team to go to Taiwan.
I got a phone call from Odle, and he asked me if I would consider and even pray about being on that team. And I said, well, Don, there are some things in life you don't even need to pray about. I know that it's God's will that I join the team.
After Dick's invitation, we received a telegram from Madam Chiang Kai-shek saying that she's the wife of the President of Free China, and she wanted to extend on behalf. And I think the telegram says Youth for Christ, which became, Overseas Crusade, but on the part of Dick Hillison's group, that they would extend us an invitation to come over and meet with their people over there.
There was one time when there was a question mark before they left. They had to have a certain amount of money for the tickets to get over there before they could go, and they didn't have that amount of money, but he had a lady who lived on campus, a returned missionary, who called him in one day and said, Don, I want to talk to you. And she didn't have a lot of money, but she said, Don, I feel God is leading me to give $1,000, which was the biggest gift that they had received for your trip this summer. And it just kind of sealed it, because when he came home that night, he felt assured that this was God's plan.
The 1952 Venture for Victory team was comprised of Taylor basketball players Don Granitz, Jack Jackson, Howie Habecker, Johnny Nelson, Norm Holmskog, and Bud Schaefer, Wheaton College All-American. Coached by Odle, the first trip abroad provided the team with continuous opportunities to present their faith in Jesus Christ throughout the Orient.
Bud was just, he was the core person on the first team. He played at Wheaton, of course, and he was the only non-Taylor person on that first team. And in fact, I think he was the one that gave the name Venture for Victory. I mean, it was his idea, I believe.
And I said, Don, I prayed about it, and I will be glad to join this. And I thought, what would I call it? And it just came to me. I feel that God gave me the name of that team right then, and I didn't even have to think 5 seconds about it. And I said, Don, I will be glad to join this Venture for Victory. And I put in parentheses, hey, that might be a good name for the team.
The cultural impact was interesting because at the age of 21, I had never even flown in an airplane, and from there we traveled, I think it was something like 47,000 miles that year in an airplane. So that was my first plane ride out of Fort Wayne all the way to the Far East.
You asked the question, could it be done any other way? You send a lecturer out, it can't be done that way. Send an artist out, you might draw a certain kind of a crowd, but only a certain kind, and only so many in the audience and so forth.
I think maybe the most impressive part of that was the way they came to the games. It didn't matter whether it was in the Olympic Stadium, in Rizal Stadium in Philippines, in any of the major stadiums, or just one of the barrios where they just put up 2 baskets. People just came. They loved basketball. And throughout the Orient, they love it.
It was really a most magnificent experience. Little did I know what it all held or how it would affect me. It was a leap of faith. Coach Odle was a visionary, and we just had faith in him that if he thought it could be done, we could do it. And as a result of that, we just said, hey, if God's in it, we got to be a part of it.
When we were on the island of Guamoy, it was an army outpost, and there were thousands of soldiers on both sides of the court. And we were able to play their team the first half. And during the program that we would put on at halftime, we had a quartet and we had a trumpet duet, and then we would preach John 3:16. Well, in the distance, there were some airplanes that had approached the field where we were playing. And of course, we were only about a mile and a half from communist China. And being in free China, all these soldiers and all these military people forgot what was going on in the court, but they had looked up into the sky looking to see what those airplanes could be identified, whether it was foe or whether it was friend. And that struck me that afternoon to recognize that these people live in fear of their enemy. And it was just an exciting and thrilling and exuberant expression of joy and shouting when 2 Grumman 52 aircraft that the United States had given to China, Taiwan, China, flew over, and boy, the crowd just went wild. And as a result, we didn't play the second half, if I remember correctly, because of the excitement that those friendly airplanes showed to those people that were just a mile and a half away from their foe.
The 52 team's first stop was a 2-week stay in Hawaii to train for the Asian climate. The first official stop was in the Philippines, where unbeknownst to the team, they were invited to play the Philippine Olympic team in front of 12,000 spectators, where they split a game apiece. The first year was marked by other popular contests, such as games played against Taiwan's national team, the 7 Tigers.
I remember some big games. When we first moved into, or flew into Manila, we didn't think there was going to be anyone to visit us at all or greet us. And as we got there, we found out that that very night, we were scheduled to play the Olympic team from the Philippines. And that was a shock. Went into a stadium. I really don't know what it held, but probably 10,000 people. And back here at Taylor, we were playing the 500. And it was quite an awesome experience. It just kind of blew you away. We did well. We did split games with the Philippine Olympic team. And I had the privilege to hit the top and log some points that were the scoring record of the Coliseum at that point.
We're the first team at Taylor to ever win 20 ball games. We had a record of something like 21-2 that year. So I knew I had the nucleus for a fine basketball team, and we had a center on our team, Forrest Jackson. I'd been a 2-time All-American, but there were some other really dedicated Christian young men who had a vision, like Howard Habiger, a Mennonite boy. And the funny thing, one was Free Methodist, and one was Evangelical Free, another one was a Baptist, Norm Homescog, I think, was a Baptist. Not one person belonged to the same denomination. Don Grannis was Christian Missionary Alliance, we were Methodist. And now, you see, denominations didn't involve in this. We realized right there that we had one message for the world, and that was the closer we got to Christ, the closer we got to one another. And if it worked for all of these people, who some came from New York, Pennsylvania, who were members of our basketball team, if this would work here, we could share the same love with people in the Orient, and it worked.
Some people think that the Chinese are so small they would not be good basketball players, but they're tricky, and they're good shots. And they had an excellent team called the Seven Tigers. In Chinese, you'd call it Qi Hu Dui. And we played games against them that were very, very, very close. And we managed to beat them over 150 games that we started with there in Taiwan in the first couple of years. But it was always close, maybe 1 or 2 points, maybe an overtime. And so they were an excellent team.
Indicative of the first Venture for Victory tour, the team's winning percentage during the life of the program was overwhelming. However, the success on the court paled in comparison to their success in sharing the gospel with tens of thousands throughout the years.
We had no idea what we were doing when we went there. We knew we had been called by God and we wanted to go, and God was in it. And so we did a lot of things just to try and get something that made sense. Play basketball, we could do that. And we played anyone and everyone, their best teams, backyard play games and so forth, clinics, whatever. And then we tried to give our testimonies as to why we were really there and how we wanted people to know our Christ, our Savior. And so we finally got that all together, speaking at halftime concerning our faith and just telling something about our lives and how Christ had changed us and how it could change someone else. And then afterwards, if they were interested, they could stay with us and we could share afterwards really the truth of what it was all about. Christ in us, a hope of glory.
The days were long. Many days, 2 or 3 games would be played. No rest was taken at halftime, as the real purpose of the day was undertaken. Through a winsome witness, Coach Odle and his team shared the good news of Christ in coliseums and outdoor courts, and in schools, military bases, and neighborhoods.
So many games out in the Oriental sun, 2 and 3 games a day sometimes, many times. These young American collegians started to get tired. And as we would go to halftime, the first half would end, and the other team would go get their refreshment or talk to their coach, take their break. We immediately went to the center of the court. I mean immediately. And that was our rest time as we shared the gospel. And Schaefer, countless times, I can hear him again today practically saying, "Smile, guys, smile. You're representing Jesus." And we didn't really want to smile some of those times, quite honestly. We'd rather go on to sit down and have a Coke or a break or something. But those guys, those more mature men and God-loving missionaries, they knew why we were really there. Halftime was the real thing. We were still kind of basketball-oriented enough that was key.
There are 6 people in my life that were defining moments in my Christian pilgrimage, and Coach Odle is one of those 6. He coached me in basketball, he made me a better player, but he also was interested in my spiritual development. He prayed with me and for me. We had Monday night prayer meetings, athletic prayer meetings in Old Maytag Gymnasium every Monday night at 8 o'clock, and I was always there, and those were defining moments in my Christian life.
And I guess the biggest thing impressed me was, as a college athlete, was at the halftime or at the end of the game, we'd have a chance, us college guys, to open the Bible and share our testimony and some verses of Scripture, and flocked around. with these young men and women, all from all over the Orient. And that was a huge impression on my life, that a Christian in sports could share his faith to those that love that sport.
Here's a 20-year-old who grew up in central Indiana, suddenly flying to the Orient. This is before the days of jets, so it was a long trip. I remember my family laughing how many pictures I took of the sky, of the clouds on the way to the Orient. But the privilege of being in another countries, but any of the countries of the Orient, for a person my age who was a fairly young Christian at that time, and being able to stand in four groups and share their faith with these people was an overpowering experience. The basketball was beyond description. Growing up in Indiana, I loved basketball, but basketball was only a means to an end. That's the reason the people came together.
When we had the opportunity to be in front of the group of people who were there out of necessity too, that we were able to get in front of a group of which they would listen, and it would be translated of what Jesus Christ meant to me as a young person and what I felt that I wanted to be in my ministry, but more so also in my dedication to wherever I am, to be active for the Lord, and especially being involved with young people.
Let me mention here that not only was it just an impact of that halftime, the organization behind it was significant with some of the ministries over there, and there was a lot of good follow-up programs that continued for Bible study and correspondence courses. So we were interested not only just in the impact it may have for a halftime, but for a lifetime.
Telling people about Jesus at the halftime, we'd get up and we'd learn a little song in Chinese, Lai Xin Yesu, Ta Yao Jioni, come to Jesus and he will save you. And I knew John 3:16 in Chinese, and we had an accordion player and a trumpet player, and we just made a joyful noise there at the camps and the schools. And it was just an unheard of opportunity, and it really got into my blood, you know, to be there in 1952.
When Venture for Victory was created, little to no other sports evangelism programs existed. Today, there are literally hundreds worldwide. Don Odle and his teams were out front, blazing a trail in distant lands, spreading the gospel through the talents they possessed.
When you think about an experience like this, and it's reflecting on nearly 50 years, you just have to say that God uses unlikely people, kids, 19 years old, to do extraordinary things. And it only happens when you're willing to let go and let the Lord just do his mighty work within you.
He and Bonnie, their commitment to ministry, regardless of what it cost them, they just were committed to doing the job, and my hat's off to both of them.
I feel that God has really worked miracles for us, the first team to go. I think there was a purpose in us being there and being the ones that had the privilege to go.
Boy, I get a chill even being asked a question of what Odle meant to me. As I mentioned, he led me to Christ. He introduced me to the Christian faith. He was my basketball coach. And as a young guy, I revered my coach. He set an example with his wife Bonnie of how a couple are to live. And Jan and I patterned our life after that kind of an example.
I think athletics did two things. Number one, the world understands sport, and sport is a way of getting an audience. The second thing is that we were a bunch of Americans, and for the most part white Americans. There were a few Afro-Americans that went, but that drew the crowds.
Without a doubt, it was the most significant thing that ever happened to me as a young person, and also probably even as an adult, because it was transforming.
We saw that the gospel really reaches to every heart. There is a vacuum in there that God alone can fill, and even though we were, as Don said, 10,000 miles from home, the basic needs of man for God in his life were there. And no matter what the situation, whether they were a soldier on the Pescador Islands or even the wife of the president of Free China was a believer. But it was interesting to be in a culture where there is not basically Christian in these different countries. And it gave a wide open door through sports that opened the door, that gave us the opportunity to witness. And that was the whole idea of Venture for Victory, is using this as a means to open the door, to present the good news of Jesus Christ.
As far as I know, there are over 150 groups in the world now that use sports to reach people for Jesus Christ. And we had the privilege of being on that first team in 1952. We never dreamed how God would use it in so many sports. So many people looked at us and they thought, the Christians that were looking at us, they thought, well, if they can use it playing basketball, maybe we can use it.
My husband was the aggressive one in the family, and when he played basketball, he was known for the fast break. He would be the first one down to hit the basket. And that kind of carried over in all of his life, even in this mission project.
God is the one that has introduced this program and brought it to its beginning, and has continued on through the years. A lot of people have been involved. Dick Hillis, Bud Schaefer, Norm Cook, the players on the 52 team, Coach Don Odle, have all contributed. But there's one person, one factor, one power, and that's God himself that's done this.